If it's Friday, it's a presidential game of telephone, as President-elect Trump says Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum told him she'd effectively close the Mexican border. Sheinbaum says she made no such promise. Plus, a world first, Australia imposes a ban on social media sites for children under the age of 16, reigniting debate here in the U.S. and around the world about the impact of excessive social media use on children's mental and physical health. And Lebanese civilians begin the slow process of rebuilding as the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah appears to hold for now, despite allegations of violations from both sides. Hi there. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles in Washington, where Thanksgiving week football doesn't have a monopoly on calls being under review. President-elect Donald Trump and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum spoke Wednesday following Mr. Trump's threat to impose a 25% tariff on everything imported from Mexico unless it ends the flow of migrants and fentanyl into the United States. In a social media post after the call, the president-elect said that Sheinbaum, quote, agreed to stop migration through Mexico and into the United States, effectively closing our southern border. In a subsequent post, Mr. Trump said that Mexico will stop people from going to our southern border effective immediately. Trump's incoming Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, praised the call as Trump already delivering on his campaign promises.
Is the president already making progress?
Making more than progress. He's already delivering historic change, the change that he campaigned on months before he even returns to the Oval Office. Donald Trump is reestablishing the principle, the doctrine of America first, of our national sovereignty and our national security. And he's rebuilding a cooperative, collaborative relationship with Mexico.
However, President Sheinbaum didn't see their conversation the same way. In a statement of her own, she said, in our conversation with President Trump, I explained to him the comprehensive strategy that Mexico has followed to address the migration phenomenon respecting human rights. We reiterate that Mexico's position is not to close borders, but instead build bridges between government and people. Nothing in there about closing the border. Of course, we won't know what happens with Trump's threat to impose sweeping tariffs on Mexico until he takes office, but some folks are skeptical of those threats. They include President Biden, who spoke to reporters yesterday in Nantucket, urging the president-elect to reconsider.
I hope he rethinks it. I think it's a counterproductive thing to do. We're surrounded by the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and two allies, Mexico and Canada. And the last thing we need to do is begin to screw up those relationships. I think we've got them in a good place.
Joining me now for the soon-to-be winter White House in South Florida is NBC News senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. Kelly, hi. What do we know about what was said on this call that led Trump and the Mexican president to have pretty different accounts?
Well, one of the things that will certainly be noteworthy here is that unlike the typical process, and we do this a lot where we compare Donald Trump to a typical process and we see the daylight between them, it would normally have a call of this nature where a head of state in the new president of Mexico, an incoming head of state with Donald Trump, there would be others on the call who would be doing note-taking, who would be memorializing the conversation so that if there were disputes, that could be cleared up, and also just for a sense of the relationship over time and for the use of the United States government to have a good record of what was said. It's our understanding that those kinds of checks are not being done in the way he is conducting calls now. We'll see if he does so when he's back in office. But he also uses his social media as a way to negotiate, to push his preferred account of it. He's clearly trying to have a friendly tone toward President Sheinbaum, but she is also trying to keep it pleasant, as she took real pains in both press conferences and in her social media posts to talk about the call in productive, pleasant way. She used those sort of descriptors, but she was also unafraid to politely distinguish some of the points. And part of that is she's saying it is not the policy of Mexico to close the border. She did say that she discussed with the president-elect the fact that Mexico is trying to stem the flow of caravans of migrants coming through her country toward the southern border. He interpreted that perhaps as closing the border. She sees it differently. So perhaps the good news at the moment is that the tone is largely favorable among these two. So this isn't some kind of battle between them, but they view the facts differently. And it certainly sets up what will be a very consequential relationship, as it always is, with the United States and our neighbors to the south with Mexico and to the north with Canada, right?
And Kelly, could also tell us a little bit about how Donald Trump intends to use this threat of tariffs once he takes office. The fact that he was already ready to claim victory on that threat, probably an indication that he believes that this is an effective tool. How is this being received by key folks in Washington? Do they see this as a sign that Trump wants to use these tariffs as a threat but not necessarily follow through?
There is certainly an expectation that he uses them as a negotiating tool to try to extract something from the other party. And sometimes it is the purchase of goods, a policy change. Sometimes he does, in fact, put tariffs in place. And then after a period of time, other countries respond as a consequence of that and want to do things differently. So it's an active tool that he uses not only in the run-up, in the execution of it, but in the follow-through. We saw that in the first term, where sometimes it would be a bank shot. He's talking with one country, but another country responds differently. So he likes the volatility of that, one would surmise, based on his making them such a central part of his economic plan. What he does not do is get bogged down in the details of what specific tariff, how would it be enacted, at what price, at what cost, and for what duration. That stuff does happen, but it's not what he focuses on at this point. He is trying to set the terms of what the second Trump presidency will be like, with friendly nations and more adversarial ones. President Biden also said he was concerned about China, very different, complex relationship, very different than Canada and Mexico. But there, too, President Biden said he hopes that President Trump will give it careful thought, because in the words of President Biden, he said he believes that President Xi of China doesn't want to mess up that relationship, doesn't want to make a mistake, is what he had said. So that's part of what we're seeing here, is everyone trying to game out what does Donald Trump mean and what will he actually do. Ryan? Okay.
Kelly O'Donnell, thank you for that. Joining me now for some insight is Pete Seat, the former White House spokesman under President George W. Bush and the vice president in both public affairs group, and Basil Smikle, a former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party and an NBC News political analyst. So, Pete, President-elect Donald Trump and a foreign leader had a call in which there were two very different statements afterwards. Does it feel like we're back in 2017 yet?
We're watching the same movie once again, Ryan. Whether lost in translation or talking past each other, I think they were effectively saying the same thing. Mexico has been patting itself on the back for months now because of their stops along highways and plucking migrants, potential illegal immigrants, into the United States of America off buses and trains. They believe, the Mexican government believes, that they are doing enough to stem the flow across our southern border. Donald Trump disagrees, and the voters who voted for him disagree. And that's why he is making this threat of a tariff. And it's very similar to the one he made in 2018. And the then Mexican president came to the table, negotiated with Donald Trump, and increased their security measures. And that's likely what Trump is trying to get out of it this time as well.
And I guess, Pete, the biggest difference, right, between 2017 and now is that when Donald Trump won then, it was a surprise. No one was prepared for him. They didn't know what they were dealing with. Now he's a known quantity. There's a record to look upon. Does that change how he may interact with some of these world leaders and how they treat him?
Well, they also know that he can be a little unpredictable. And you saw Prime Minister Trudeau from Canada and the Mexican president, not long after he put this thread out on Truth Social, were on the phone with him having a conversation. So they clearly took it seriously enough to engage in that dialogue with Donald Trump 2 months before he actually takes office.
So, Basil, Democrats are worried that Trump may just hit the ground running, launch these full-bore tariffs right away when he takes office in January. Tell me how you view this claim of victory from the call with the Mexican president. Does it tell you that perhaps it's just a bargaining trip and a threat instrument, or are you worried that these tariffs could become a reality very quickly?
Well, both things are true, I guess, in my mind and in my analysis. I think to Kelly's point earlier, she makes a great point that in many ways Donald Trump uses social media to negotiate. It is true. He uses social media to govern in many respects, and he uses it to negotiate. So this is one position. I'm actually glad that he even used talked about fentanyl, because that's something that, a lot of folks have been talking about in terms of the porous border and between that and sex trafficking that needed to be curbed through some kind of strong relationship with Mexico. So I do think that it sort of pulls world leaders, owing to your question before about how leaders respond, it pulls world leaders to him. They've got to respond to him, whether they like the way they have to respond or not. He forces them to respond to him in certain ways. I think he likes that. I think he actually believes that that is the best use of his authority in the bully pulpit from the White House. But I also go to something that Bill Clinton used to say, that the United States is only 4% of the world's population. So there's only so much we can make and sell to each other. That means that we have to have these strong relationships with countries outside of our borders, because that's 85% of our market. So if the points that he's making and the policy that he's pushing forward causes there to be a rupture in that relationship, or to make things much more expensive for Americans, which is what so many economists have said, then it does cause some long-term damage that, I'm not so sure that we at this point have the ability to fix in the short term. So again, I look at sort of his voters, those that supported him, and whether or not they're actually going to benefit from this public negotiation.
Okay, so let's talk about one of his biggest promises, and that is a mass deportation of undocumented immigrants. Pete, I want to play some sound from Tom Homan, who's Trump's incoming border czar. Take a listen.
So this operation is going to be much bigger than anything we've ever done. But here's what I'm trying to tell people. People say, well, really a mass operation, isn't that inhumane? Isn't that racist? No. You can't let millions of people into this country, across the border illegally, which is a crime. They demand to see a judge. They demand the right to due process. They demand the right to make an asylum claim. Okay, you have that right, and we're going to give you that opportunity. We'll give you your day in court. But at the end of that process, when a federal judge says you got to go home, they have to go home, because if we don't send them home, then what the hell are we doing?
That's some pretty big talk, Pete, about mass deportations. I mean, what could this effectively look like? Isn't there a real possibility it could get messy?
Well, anything the government gets its hands in has the potential to get messy. But I think what we hear there from Tom Homan is that he is a no-nonsense personality. He is someone who is known for getting the job done. In fact, the Washington Post did a profile on him years ago, and they said Tom Homan deports people, and he's very good at it. In fact, he was a Border Patrol agent, worked his way up the ranks to become acting ICE director previously, and he has received accolades and commendation from both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats. Barack Obama himself gave Tom Homan the federal government's highest civil service award for his work in deporting illegal immigrants. So if anyone knows what to do and how to do it, Tom Homan's the guy.
So, Basil, how do you think Democratic state and local executives, though, are going to play this? Do you think it's smart for them to not cooperate if the deportations become too aggressive? How could that standoff play itself out?
Yeah, no, it's interesting about the Barack Obama comment, because a lot of immigration activists actually faulted him for what seemed to be aggressive deportation under his administration. So I actually think that, clearly the advocates, the folks on the ground who are working with immigrant communities, who are, provide legal support, there's going to be a lot of concern there. What I think is the bigger concern is really about the families, for example. Like, how are you breaking up families? Are you ripping people apart? How are you pressing local governments, cities, for example, who said that, who claim to be sanctuary cities, they've been a particular target under the Trump administration. So I think one of the big questions is, how are mayors and governors going to respond if they believe that not acquiescing to what Donald Trump and the federal government wants to do, what's the impact on their funding? What's the impact on resources and programs that are run by the state, but really are funded through the federal government? So I think in some ways there's going to have to be some kind of conversation with mayors and governors, particularly with the advocates, to say, look, there's a lot that we can do to help protect some of these families and some of the folks that are here. But with the pressure coming from the federal government, we may have to make some very tough choices. That's going to be very difficult going forward. And look, as a child of immigrants, I'm particularly concerned about this.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Pete, Basil, thank you both for being here. We appreciate it. Turning now to the latest after a series of unsettling developments with more political leaders saying they've been targeted by bomb threats. Several members of the Connecticut congressional delegation, all Democrats, said that they were targeted yesterday while preparing to celebrate Thanksgiving at their homes. And now Rhode Island Congressman Seth Magaziner also said that he was the target of a bomb threat, but thankfully no bombs were found. It comes after several of President-elect Trump's cabinet picks and executive branch appointees were targeted by bomb threats and swatting attacks earlier this week. And moments ago, President Biden was asked for his reaction to the bomb threats, telling reporters that we're working the issue hard with the FBI. My NBC News colleague Ryan Riley has more.
Lawmakers in Connecticut were threatened on Thanksgiving Day, with a number of lawmakers receiving these threats against their houses. There was a mailbox threat. There have been numerous threats against lawmakers. And this sort of fits into this broader notion that we've seen recently with members of the public, or rather prominent members of the public, being threatened, including both lawmakers and members of Donald Trump's own cabinet. We saw the number of those threats frequently come in. The Justice Department in recent years has been taking action, and even in recent weeks has been taking action against some of these threats, but they're often difficult to trace because they can come from overseas. And sometimes they're just to sort of sow chaos, whereas other times you see these threats coming that are targeted at a specific party. And often the FBI has to decipher where these threats are coming from, whether they're domestic, whether they're foreign, whether a foreign entity is coming and threatening these individuals. But it all sort of just speaks to this broader notion that often public figures now are coming under threat on a pretty regular basis. Brian?
Okay, Ryan Riley, thank you for that. After the break, the Australian ban that has tech companies saying, oi, 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 what the ban on social media for children under 16 could mean in Australia and right here in the U.S. And still to come, Black Friday means big shopping deals and big airport lines. We'll let you know what to expect from your holiday weekend. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Amid a raging debate here in the United States about the effects of social media on children, Australia has made history, passing a first-of-its-kind ban on social media for everyone under the age of 16. The ban will impact platforms like Facebook, TikTok, and Snapchat, and it puts the burden on those platforms to enforce the ban. NBC News correspondent Liz Krutz has more.
Under the new law, tech companies will be required to take reasonable steps to verify a user's age and prohibit those under 16 from creating accounts, or else face millions in fines.
We have heard the cries of families who are suffering.
The controversial measure meant to help protect young people from the negative effects of social media. The American Psychological Association has warned about the addictive nature of these apps and the negative impact it can have on a child's mental health and body image. In Australia, Wayne Holdsworth says his son died by suicide after a sextortion scam.
Anyone that says that this is not a good idea has not lived through my life.
But the law is facing fierce opposition, including from the big tech companies and Elon Musk, who wrote on X, seems like a backdoor way to control access to the internet by all Australians. And others, including some teens, are questioning how a law like this will be enforced.
It will only create a generation of young people who will be more technologically literate in bypassing these walls.
And how it will be enforced really is the big question here. There's not a lot of specifics yet in the law. Tech companies will be responsible for the enforcement. They have a year to figure out how to do it before the law takes effect in 2026. Back to you.
Thanks, Liz. Casey Mock joins me now. He's the Chief Policy and Public Affairs Officer for the Center for Humane Technology. It's a nonprofit whose work was featured in the Emmy Award-winning documentary, The Social Dilemma. Casey, this is an issue that I care a lot about, with 4 children under the age of 16 who could potentially be impacted by these decisions. I mean, what do you make of Australia's ban? Is this a model policy, or could it be misdirected frustration?
Well, I wouldn't go so far to call it a model policy, Ryan, but I think I just want to go back to, what you said about your own experience as a parent. And really the way in which this policy is a model is that the government was really trying to be responsive to the concerns of Australian parents. I believe a survey conducted by the eSafety Commissioner showed that 95% of Australian parents think that social media is one of their chief parenting challenges. And another survey said that over 77% of Australians supported the bill. Now, I will say that also there's recognition that I don't think the government is done here, and that there's certainly, in addition, to the details that have to be added over the next year before the law comes into effect, there's additional measures that the government is considering, such as installing a duty of care for the companies to adhere to.
Mm-hmm. The ban right now applies to teens under the age of 16. Is that an appropriate age?
I think that's part of the question. Children obviously mature at different paces and patterns. And, I think that there's wide recognition that the self-enforcement of a, age gap around 13 is not sufficient here. But certainly the question of what age is appropriate is going to be an ongoing debate here and around the world going forward.
And then, of course, the biggest question every time we talk about regulating technology of any kind, but even more so social media, is how on earth do you enforce this? Is this an enforceable law, or is it really just more of a statement?
It's going to be really challenging. The measure by which companies will be expected to verify users' ages is one of these things that's to be determined under the bill. And some things have been discussed as uploading some forms of ID. Some of the more invasive measures were removed from the bill at a later date. Now, I will say, however, that these companies have a surprising amount of information about their users already, just based on their patterns of usage on the platforms. And companies like Instagram can already determine with a high degree of accuracy using user data how old their users are. And we know this from whistleblowers like Francis Haugen and Arturo Bejar, who have disclosed internal documents showing this. And so it may not necessarily be the case that some sort of, privacy invading measure to require uploads of IDs or verified IDs is required in that case. But again, like many things with this bill, it all remains to be seen of how the government shakes it out over the next 12 months.
Well, I know from my own experience that the idea of banning all social media or even access to screens seems wonderful as a father. I would love to be able to do that. But I also understand that we live in this society now where screen culture has become such an important part of our society. My kids are using devices to learn in school, to communicate with their sports teams, to talk to their friends. Critics are arguing that this ban could lead to more isolation among kids, which could be just as dangerous as what they're being exposed to on social media. Where's the balance there about trying to control or at least regulate their access to this material while at the same time not leaving them out of the kind of global conversation that's happening online?
Well, that concern, I think, goes to the heart of what is maybe the most powerful criticism of the bill, is that it actually doesn't do much to improve the quality of the product that kids are still going to inevitably going to be accessing. And the proposal to make that change was actually in an amendment that was introduced by a member of Parliament, Zoe Daniel, to install a digital duty of care that I mentioned before, that has broad support across Parliament, that even the Prime Minister himself a few weeks ago mentioned he intended to introduce as well. And so by having a design-centric solution that, treats these online spaces like physical spaces, to which things like, in a building, we have a fire escape requirement in the building code, or smoke detectors required in the building code. And I think there's an acknowledgement that taking a design-focused approach is the solution to making the product better for everyone, rather than leaving some, deep, dark corners of the internet uncovered and unregulated by this technology. And I'll say that this is an approach that we actually know already works. The United Kingdom introduced the age-appropriate design code, I believe 4 years ago. And as a result of that, TikTok and Instagram made design changes across their platforms across the world that made it better for everyone. Maryland has also had a law resembling this recently go into effect. And so I think that that's probably the answer to your concern there, is a more design-centric approach rather than just trying to wall off certain parts of the internet for people under a certain age.
And for tech illiterate people, when you say design-centric, that means these algorithms that aren't so super addictive that kids are just constantly scrolling all day long. Would that be an example of changing the way they're presented?
Exactly, right. There's some design features that the companies, have put in to maximize the revenue of the products and maximize engagement of the products. And they aren't necessary features for the products to have the same sort of social utility, of connecting people that make these products, so attractive. So for, an example of this is something called a dark pattern, right? A manipulative design that's designed to sort of keep you on the site and keep you using certain features of it. Another feature of some of these design-centric approaches is banning geolocation being on by default for young people's account, right? There's no reason why a 13-year-old should be pinging her location to Facebook, right? Turning messaging off for strangers to contact kids. That's another obvious one. There's no reason why strangers should be able to contact your 13 or your 14-year-old through these apps.
Well, Casey, I could talk to you about this all day, but unfortunately, we only have an hour in this program, and I've got to get to other people. But terrific analysis of this. I appreciate you being on here. And we're going to now move to talk to Clint Watts about this, who's another expert in the field. He's the leader of Microsoft's Digital Threat and Analysis Center. He's, of course, an NBC News national security analyst. Clint, just off the top, your thoughts on Australia's ban and whether or not you think it can be enforced.
Yeah, in terms of the enforcement, I don't know. I think as it's probably just constructed right now, no one knows how to enforce it, but they did allow that 1 year period. I think what's remarkable is I was just looking at some of the polling around the passage of that. The number I saw was 77% of Australian parents were in support of this bill, and that's a remarkably high number. And you were just speaking to that. And really, it comes into the implementation. No one has really tried to implement this. Australia has moved out on laws before. You might remember they tried to restrict news and news feeds in different ways inside the country a few years ago. Now they're focused on social media. There's several components to this. Age verification, very difficult to do in a way that also isn't necessarily violating privacy. You've seen some of these techniques of uploading a driver's license or an identification. Those oftentimes can be faked, or you can see stolen data in that way. That's going to be a tough challenge. I think the other part is which applications would be included, which wouldn't. Some of them, for example, YouTube has a lot of educational features on there. Many people use it for their television. So where does that line draw between what is considered social media, or what kind of activities are considered social media, and then how to implement some of these? I think is going to be quite difficult because not all social media applications are the same. So putting those standards, and I like the comment before, right, when I was coming on here about design, principles of design that are consistent across applications is probably the way to go to get to the end state that I think they're looking for in Australia.
And I feel like every time we have these conversations, it gets back to the responsibility of these social media companies. It's going to be almost impossible to enforce in many ways, but shouldn't there be a degree of responsibility taken on by these massive companies that are making billions in dollars in profits, that they understand that the very users that are taking advantage of this platform are being hurt by it and that they need to change their ways?
Yeah, one of the things that I find interesting is the social media platforms or tech companies will apply to whatever laws are passed. And so this has happened, interestingly enough, in Australia before, where news was removed from different feeds. They implemented that. And I think then there was a cry from people to say, hey, I want some of these features back. And then they moved to a middle ground on this. I think one of the challenges is not all social media applications are the same. They have different features or serve different purposes. Some are microbloggers, some are streaming platforms. You go to video game platforms, for example, they have a very different model. And so some of those principles that you will see that maybe governments want regulated aren't consistent across all the applications. That's going to be very difficult to do. Snapchat isn't exactly like Facebook, which isn't exactly like X or Telegram, which isn't even close to what YouTube or TikTok are, which are mostly video platforms. So when it comes time to administer these controls and regulate it, where the breakdown tends to come from is getting the platforms able in a way to have those design principles. In some ways, I'm hopeful, though, because this sort of a movement puts a line down that says that something needs to happen. And once you have that as a goal, a clear and crystal goal in a specific location, I think you can see movement towards this. If you look at the tech companies that are adapting to GDPR in Europe, which was related to European regulators, there are principles that have been done before. It'll be interesting in the next year to see if there's some sort of alignment between how to actually implement this versus what the intent of the laws are.
And we don't have that much more time, but I would have to imagine that you would think that the United States lawmakers are going to keep a very close eye on how this is implemented in Australia.
They will, but I would say with all the tech companies and, having working at one and having worked with most of them, the biggest challenge is how to implement across the globe in many different regulatory environments. So how do you have the same platform or functions in one nation and another and abide by their laws and the laws of another area like the European Union? So that is going to be one of the most difficult challenges, I think, for the tech companies, how to figure that out. You would need to know where people are at and how old they are. That's two dimensions of privacy that are always very challenging when you're trying to also make sure that people are secure and safe on the internet.
Okay, Clint Watts, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Coming up next, the biggest shopping day of the year is here. What it means for the nation's largest retailers and the state of the American consumer. That's after the break. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. It's not an official holiday, but today is one of the most highly anticipated days of the year for bargain hunters. As millions of Americans shop in stores and online for Black Friday deals, more than 130 million people plan to shop today, according to the National Retail Federation. And busy stores today will make for way more crowded airports and roadways tomorrow and Sunday for what's traditionally the busiest travel weekend of the year. We'll check the travel situation in just a moment, but let's start by going to NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung. He's at the Garden State Plaza Mall in Paramus, New Jersey. Brian, what are the crowds like there today? And how does this Black Friday compare to recent Black Fridays in terms of the total amount of business done?
Yeah, happy Black Friday to you, Ryan, and to all who observe. I've been at the Garden State Plaza Mall here in Paramus, New Jersey all day, just kind of taking a look at all the shopping activity. And there are plenty of people walking around, but not everyone's got bags, and that's because they're a little bit choosier this year. And I've been talking to a lot of people all day who've been saying, yeah, the deals and discounts were okay, 10, 20%, but ultimately they were hoping to get dazzled with deeper discounts that would ultimately get them through the checkout line. But for what it's worth, it hasn't changed the expectations on the macro scale, because you have the National Retail Federation forecasting what could be up to $989 billion. Again, with the B, that's almost $1 trillion in sales across this holiday shopping season. And when you combine that with separate statistics that we got from Adobe Analytics telling us that Thanksgiving sales already just over the course of yesterday were $6.1 billion, which is almost 9% higher than last year and a record, well, it tells you that we might be off to a record-breaking, potentially, weekend of holiday shopping. So again, we'll have to see how the numbers come in. Right now, again, we don't have the Black Friday numbers so far, but it seems like people are out and about shopping in what could be another year of the consumer boosting the economy, Ryan.
I wonder just how important Black Friday is for retailers overall, especially given the fact that they're offering these special discounts and deals all season long, not just on Black Friday. Does it have the same impact that it's had in past years?
Well, I mean, to your point, there certainly is the calendar creep of Black Friday these days, because you had retailers that were offering Black Friday deals as early as November 1. But look, when you talk to retail experts, retail executives, they'll tell you the same thing, that Black Friday and Cyber Monday weekend does remain the most important shopping weekend of the year, because consumers and also the retailers expect that to be the highest traffic time, not just online, but also in stores. So it is still the priority, and that's why Adobe Analytics, which also tracks prices, says that you do tend to see the deepest discounts on this weekend as well. On Black Friday itself, they say TVs tend to be the most deeply discounted, but you might want to wait until Cyber Monday for electronics and also apparel. A little bit of news you can use for those that are perusing the sales this weekend.
Okay, and to everyone in Brian's family, he's at the mall right now, so now would be a good time to text him your Christmas list, because he can head right to the store. Brian, thank you for that. Turning from the malls to the roads now, and that's where Gary Grumbach joins me on the ground along I-95 in Woodbridge, Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. So, Gary, when can we expect to see most travelers begin their trip home?
Hey there, Ryan. Yeah, this is an area you're particularly familiar with here in Northern Virginia. Folks are already on their way. As you can see, they've got enough food, they've got enough of their family, and now they are hitting the road back to their homes. And folks are in good spirit, the ones that we've talked to today. They say the gas prices are low, and they are. In fact, they are 25 cents cheaper than they were last Thanksgiving. Last Thanksgiving, we were about $3.25. Today, we are at $3.06. So that's good news on the roads. But when it comes to the air, it's a little bit of a different story. We're seeing 1,800 delays at airports nationwide, particularly up north, where I'm sure you're going to get a weather report in a little bit, where it's going to be Detroit, Buffalo, your Bills game on Sunday. Might have a little bit of an issue getting to and from there for some fans. So that is significant with that snow that's coming in from the lake effect area. That's going to affect both the roads and, of course, the flights. 1,800 delays, only about 34 cancellations. And part of the reason for that is because of a military area off the East Coast that the FAA has opened up to commercial traffic during the holiday season. So good news on the air, good news in the roads here as well, Ryan.
Yes, and I will be flying into Buffalo tomorrow night for that game. So wish me luck with that lake effect snow.
Good luck.
So when does AAA say drivers should hit the road? Is there a good time?
So this weekend is when everyone's going to, whether or not there's a good time to do it. Mornings are going to be best, though. Between 8 and 10 a.m. locally, wherever you are, is best. Sunday is frankly going to be a mess pretty much everywhere in terms of traffic. So getting out as early as you can is the best idea. Ryan.
Okay, Gary Grumbach, thank you for that, my friend. Coming up, tensions in the Middle East as Israel and Lebanon both accuse each other of violating the terms of their new ceasefire. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. It's been just 2 days since the ceasefire deal between Israel and Lebanon went into effect. But yesterday, Israel says that it carried out a strike on Hezbollah targets that were breaching the conditions of the agreement, while the Lebanese army is accusing Israel of repeatedly violating the deal. But despite the exchange of blame, the truce appears to be holding as thousands of displaced civilians continue to move back into southern Lebanon, returning to piles of rubble as they look to rebuild their lives. Joining me now is Matt Bradley in Beirut. Matt, you're on the ground in Lebanon right now. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, well, we were just out actually just yesterday in the neighborhood of Dahia, which is right behind me. This is a Shiite Muslim majority neighborhood. It is a Hezbollah stronghold, and it was absolutely pummeled by the Israelis during their expanded offensive against Hezbollah over the past 2 months. That is where Hassan Nasrallah, the slain head of Hezbollah, was basically where he was killed in a huge set of bombardments by the Israelis just about 2 months ago. Now, we were there and we were watching people already streaming back. And this was about 24 hours after the ceasefire was announced. These are desperate people who were not able to find relief or homes elsewhere in the country when this enormous, sprawling displacement crisis started, displacing about 1.2 million people, according to the Lebanese government. So now we're seeing them all moving back in, trying to restore their homes, putting out the trash. There's no electricity. There's no services. But they still have nowhere else to go, such as the desperation that has also seen really hundreds of thousands of people streaming south to the southern part of the country that was the site of Israel's ground invasion. And the Israelis had said today that they don't want Lebanese people going back to a thin band of land right along Lebanon's border with Israel, just north of it. This is the area that Israel had actually invaded with ground troops. And the Israelis have actually continued to strike against certain targets here in Lebanon. They said that they hit what looked like people who were moving back toward a Hezbollah missile silo or missile storage area. And the Lebanese and the Israelis have both complained that the opposite side has been violating the ceasefire. But as you just mentioned, Ryan, we're about a couple of hours away from the 72-hour mark since this ceasefire was first put into place. And despite those violations, despite those complaints, it looks as though this is going to hold.
Yeah, and maybe talk about that with your experience covering these type of conflicts. Is that pretty typical in the early stages of a ceasefire to see kind of this back and forth and accusations of one side or the other not holding up to the terms of the agreement? Is that pretty typical?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see it time and time again in various conflicts, especially ones that involve non-state actors like Hezbollah and military forces like Hezbollah that were really, really badly damaged by the Israelis. You know, we're talking about not just the decapitation of their leadership. I mentioned a moment ago the killing of Hassan Nasrallah just behind me here, but also across the whole leadership board of Hezbollah, we saw them systematically getting picked off by the Israelis over the past 2 months. And remember how this all started with those pager and walkie-talkie attacks that literally cut off the hands of a lot of these Hezbollah fighters. So this was already a ragtag group, a very formidable fighting force just a couple of months ago, but kind of badly damaged by the time the Israelis had launched their ground invasion and expanded their offensive against Hezbollah. So they're not going to have necessarily the same level of communications internally that they would have before. Remember, of course, the pagers attack. They were scared of their own communication systems because of that. So this is the kind of thing where you're talking about a frayed leadership trying to communicate down the ranks that there was a ceasefire, how to abide by that ceasefire. And there are also just civilians who are running amok, trying to go home, desperate, because like I said, they were not able to find relief, housing, food elsewhere in Lebanon, and there is no central government that's capable of moving down south and directing people and telling them, don't go here. So it's a free-for-all, and that is one of the things that's causing the chaos that is leading to a lot of these violations.
Okay, Matt Bradley in Lebanon. Matt, thank you for that report. Let's turn now to Paris, where after more than 5 years of rebuilding, the world is getting its first glimpse inside the iconic Notre Dame Cathedral after that devastating 2019 fire. Look at these stunning images with brand new stonework, vaulted ceilings, and vibrant stained glass windows that have been carefully restored. Today, French President Emmanuel Macron took a televised tour of the cathedral before it formally opens to the public next month. An emotional Macron thanked the carpenters, architects, and craftsmen involved in the restoration, telling them that he was, quote, infinitely grateful for their work. NBC News chief international correspondent Keir Simmons has more from Paris.
Hey, Ryan. Well, the scaffolding is still up around Notre Dame behind me there, overlooking the River Seine. But inside, my goodness, it is transformed. A restoration that has taken 5 years since the inferno that brought down the steeple at the top of the cathedral there, that moment that everybody watched around the world, that terrible time of destruction, now replaced by a reborn cathedral. Inside these beautiful white walls interspersed with colour from the glass, the stained glass windows and the murals on the walls, really superb. The gold everywhere, a new altar, a modern altar in this medieval church, a place where the crown of thorns will go, again, gold. And then up in the roof, and we saw President Macron walk around the cathedral today, including into that roof area, up there, new oak beams and a fire system, fire doors and sprinklers. So important because in the end, this restoration is bringing Notre Dame back after hundreds of years of history, for more hundreds of years, more centuries, President Macron said. He said to the workers here today, you've all had a part of that, Ryan.
All right, Keir Simmons in Paris, thank you for that. And NBC News will have special coverage on the remarkable reconstruction of Notre Dame next Thursday, December 5th at 10:30 p.m. You can tune in right here on NBC News Now. Don't miss it. And when we come back, the clock is ticking on this legislative session as countless families affected by natural disasters look to Congress for help. You're watching Meet the Press Now. When lawmakers return to Washington on Monday, they'll have just a few short weeks left to push through any remaining legislation, starting with critical government funding and a bill before the December 20th shutdown deadline. But another piece of legislation waiting to be passed is the federal disaster tax relief bill. As communities impacted by storms, fires, and other disasters continue to pick up the pieces, the bill was passed by the House back in May, but is yet to come up for a vote in the Senate. Joining me now is Jennifer Gray Thompson, CEO of After the Fire USA, a nonprofit group that's focused on supporting communities affected by wildfires. She's been leading delegations to meet with senators and urge them to pass this critical legislation before the end of Congress. Jennifer, thanks for being here. Just first off, tell us what you've heard from senators. Did you get the sense that they share your sense of urgency in getting this legislation passed before the end of the year?
You know, we've actually always had a really good reception from all senators on both sides of the aisle. This is a unique bill in that people, everyone supports it. It actually affects like 47 states. And so there's a huge amount of benefit for people across the board. We hear great things from senators, but also, you know, it's a very convoluted process to walk through politics right now. And we've been on this journey for 3 years. But our bill actually expires at the end of this, the 118th session. And so we do have a sense of urgency. They tell us they have a sense of urgency, but we really need to see them put that into action. Otherwise, it's just words.
Yeah. And if this does get kicked to next year, you mentioned the current piece of legislation you have expires. You'll have to write new legislation. There's also a whole suite of tax bills that could come up for debate, including the extension of the Trump tax cuts. Are you worried that everything could get mixed up with these new priorities with the new administration if it doesn't get done by the end of the year?
Absolutely. That's a main concern of ours. It's also that our people have been paying taxes already for 3 years. Not only are they having to claim their settlements as personal income tax every single year, they cannot deduct their attorney's fees, which is a provision of that 2017 Trump tax bill. So we don't want to get caught in that. We feel like we deserve better, and we know we've done the work. Fire survivors and disaster survivors around the country have been waiting for years for relief from Congress to actually just get back home and rebuild. We also have to rebuild back in a way that's far more resilient. We cannot just continue to rebuild back the way that we burned down or that we were affected by major hurricanes. We can do better.
And after the hurricanes of Helene and Milton, we did see that FEMA was drawn into some of these political fights. Have you seen that impact how much support disaster relief legislation is getting on Capitol Hill?
No, only on social media do we see this sort of debate. On Capitol Hill, there is a much greater sense of the impact on people's lives because most legislators actually have disaster victims in their homes. They know these people personally. There is an appetite to actually work in a bipartisan fashion, but when we see them get in front of social media, it completely changes the landscape, and there's really no relationship between what we see in the offices of senators and congressmen and what we see on social media. This isn't all of them, to be clear, but it's an awful lot of them. And it's a major concern and also a major frustration. What happened with Hurricane Helene and Milton, making that political, was really unacceptable. And then the follow-up with the discrimination from the FEMA employee only exacerbated an already terrible issue. The people caught in the middle are those who've just lost absolutely everything. And what they're asking for is that America actually step up and help them get home. And we can do that. This is the greatest nation on the planet. And yet we are sitting around like counting likes on Twitter when people who are really suffering need the help of all Congress people to really do their jobs. We need this so much right now in a bipartisan fashion. Let's get back to work in America.
And last month, there was a report that President-elect Trump was hesitant to give disaster relief aid to states that he considered politically hostile to him, including initially refusing to approve aid for California after the 2018 wildfires. Are you worried about that again? Is there any way for states or communities to protect themselves against potential retaliation from the White House?
You know, I would like to hope for the best. Obviously, you know, I am a disaster survivor from 2017, so we were caught right in the middle of that. I've been working in the Camp Fire since it happened, and we did see that. We also saw it happen at the same time with Puerto Rico. We cannot have politics enter into disaster. And I remember sitting with Kevin McCarthy in 2019, and talking to him about our very big concerns about making sure that Californians were treated fairly. We're the fourth largest economy in the world and largest sub-economy in the world. When you harm California, you actually harm the entire country, because we also feed the entire nation. And so really using politics as any kind of weapon in disaster is completely unacceptable, no matter who does it on the ground, if you're a FEMA employee or if you are the president of the United States. It's unacceptable, and it's inhumane, and it's un-American, and it should never, ever, ever happen again.
Well, Jennifer, it seems as though these monster disasters get so much attention in the immediate aftermath. You're an example of someone that's still dealing and picking the pieces up years later. And it's important for all Americans to know that trauma and that experience is still something that you live with every day. So thank you so much for your perspective. We appreciate you being here, and good luck as you continue that recovery.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. And that is going to be it for us this hour. But we'll be back Monday with more Meet the Press Now. And if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press on your local NBC station. My colleague Kristen Welko will be joined by Senators Chris Murphy and Bill Hagerty and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Don't miss it. NBC News Now coverage continues with Gotti Schwartz right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or follow us on social media.